The rain on Seeley's IV smelled like iron and green things. It always did, just before the long season turned. Sable sat at the edge of her roof and watched it come in from the east, dragging grey curtains across the valley. Her scales caught no light today. The sky had none to give. She was not large, as dragons went. The elder dragons of the southern ridge called her small-boned, which was their polite way of saying she would never grow into something fearsome. She had learned to be fine with that. Ro had once told her that the most dangerous things in the universe were rarely the biggest ones. He had said it while eating a ration bar and reading 3 books at once, which she had found both impressive and slightly chaotic. She missed him the way you miss something you never thought you would lose, quietly, constantly, the way you miss your own heartbeat only when it stutters. Inside her table had 4 chairs, 3 were used. One had a folded blanket on it, faded blue, the kind the colony issued to personnel who arrived in winter. Ro had left it behind the morning he shipped out. He had pressed it into her claws at the transport dock and said, "Keep it warm for me," and she had laughed because she thought it was a human joke about dragons and fire. She had not laughed about it in a long time. 4 years, 2 months, and some number of days. That was how long the chair had been empty. The colony had grown since then. New families, new children who had never met him and never would. A girl named Pritha, 8 years old and very loud, had asked Sable about the chair 3 weeks ago. She had pointed at it with one small finger and said, "Who sits there?" Sable had answered the way she always did, "Someone who is coming back." Pritha had looked at the chair, then at Sable, and said nothing more. Children understood things that adults talked themselves out of. The rain reached the roof. Sable went inside. She was drying her wings when the data terminal chimed. She almost ignored it. Most messages were colony notices or trade manifests, things that required responses she wrote in her careful, slanted script while thinking about something else entirely. But the sender field was blank, not unknown, not unregistered, blank in a way the terminal was not built to produce. A flag beneath it read, "Packet origin unverifiable." She sat down slowly. Inside the packet was not a message. It was a scan, handwritten. The paper was dark at the edges, water-stained, and the handwriting was immediately and completely recognizable because she had watched those hands write things 100 times across a kitchen table. It was Rose. Not a full letter, half of one. It broke off mid-sentence, the way a man stops writing when something interrupts him. The date at the top was 4 years and 3 months ago, 2 weeks before the ship called Concordance was listed as lost with all hands in the outer veil. She read it twice, then a third time slowly. He had been writing to her, not to his commanders, not to the mission record, to her. He was telling her about the stars in the outer veil, how they were closer together than anywhere he had been, how the light from them was different, older. He said the crew was good. He said he was eating properly. He said he had started a collection of things he wanted to show her when he got back. The letters stopped there. Sable sat with it for a long time. The rain came down hard outside, drumming on the roof, and she did not move. The official record was simple: navigational failure in hostile space. The Concordance and its crew had been lost. No search had been conducted. The matter was closed. She had been told this by a council notice that arrived 6 weeks after his departure, 3 paragraphs long, impersonal, signed by an administrator she had never heard of. She had read that notice many times too. She had never believed it the way you are supposed to believe official things, not because she had proof, because Ro had promised, and in 4 years she had never known him to break a promise, even small ones, even the ones that did not matter. This letter should not exist. A packet from a dead ship, from a dead man, arriving on her terminal 4 years later without an origin point. The terminal could not explain it. She could not explain it. But it was his handwriting. She knew every loop and slant of it. She had watched him write enough letters, enough reports, enough notes left on her windowsill beside half-eaten ration bars that she could have drawn his handwriting from memory. He had been writing to her. He had been thinking about her. Something had happened on that ship, something the 3-paragraph notice had not said. Sable looked at the empty chair for a long time. Then she looked at the blanket on it, faded blue, still folded the way he had handed it to her. She had spent 4 years being told, in various gentle and then less gentle ways, to grieve and move forward. Every species in the galactic community had their version of this advice. The Velsui had ceremonies. The Oru had philosophical frameworks. The colony counselor had offered her a booklet. She had been patient with all of it. She was done being patient now. She opened the colony's travel registry and began looking at freight routes toward the outer veil. It would take time. It would take money she had saved and never spent. It would take walking into places that would not want to let her in. She had time, she had money, and she had learned from watching humans that the best response to a door that would not open was simply to find a different door. The chair would wait. It had waited before. The orbital station called Arson Hub had been built by a committee, and it looked like it. Every corridor was the same grey-white. Every sign was in 8 languages and somehow still unclear. The air recyclers produced a smell that was not quite clean and not quite dirty, just endlessly, perfectly neutral, the way everything was when no one was in charge of caring about it. Sable found it deeply exhausting before she had been there an hour. She had taken a freight hauler from Sealy's IV to the nearest transit gate, then a passenger vessel from there to the hub. 7 days of travel. She had spent most of it reading, eating carefully wrapped colony food, and ignoring the looks she received. A small turquoise dragon traveling alone was unusual enough that people stared. She was used to being stared at. She stared back with amber eyes and an expression that communicated nothing in particular, and people usually found something else to look at. The Council Records Office was on level 14, behind a door that required 3 different scan passes to open and then opened without her needing any of them because someone was leaving as she arrived. She walked in behind them. No one stopped her. No one was looking. The office was staffed by 4 clerks and 1 administrator, who sat behind a raised desk in the way that people sat behind raised desks when they wanted to feel important. The administrator was Velsui, tall, feathered, with the particular expression of someone who had processed 10,000 requests and found all of them equally tiresome. Sable stood at the desk and stated, clearly and simply, what she wanted. The inquiry records for the concordance. Any logs, any navigation data, any incident reports filed in relation to its loss in the outer veil 4 years and 3 months prior. The administrator's name was Jura. She looked at Sable the way one looks at a minor inconvenience that has arrived at an inconvenient time. "Those records are sealed," she said. "Peacekeeping operational files fall under Council Security Directive 7. "I am not requesting tactical information," Sable said. "I am requesting incident documentation. The 2 categories are defined separately under the same directive." Jura blinked. It was a slow, deliberate blink. Be that as it may, any request for materials adjacent to a sealed file requires a formal petition. The review period is 14 to 22 months. Standard or expedited? There is no expedited process for this category. There is, Sable said. Article 14, subsection 3, next of kin or registered personal representative of a crew member may request accelerated review within the first 5 years of a loss event. This falls within that window by 4 months. Jura looked at her for a moment, then she looked at her terminal, then she looked at Sable again. "You are not next of kin." "I am a registered personal representative." Rowe filed the documentation before departure. "It is in the Colonial Registry of Sealy's IV, cross-filed with the Human Integration Program Office." This was true. Rowe had done it quietly, without making a point of it, 2 days before he shipped out. She had not known about it until she pulled his departure file as part of her research. He had listed her in the field for emergency contacts and legal representatives with a note that read, "She will want to know things, tell her things." Jura spent a long time looking at her terminal. Sable waited. She was good at waiting. Eventually, Jura said that she would need to verify the documentation. The verification would take 5 to 10 working days. Sable said she would wait. Jura said that was not necessary, she could leave contact information. Sable said she would wait anyway. She sat in the chairs outside the office for 6 days. She read. She ate. She spoke to no one except the junior clerk who refilled the water dispenser each morning, because the junior clerk had kind eyes and nervous hands and reminded her a little of the younger soldiers who used to visit Roe at the colony house. On the 4th day, she started asking the junior clerk small questions, not about the concordance, about the office, about the station, about how the filing system worked, which department handled which kind of record, which cases went to external review and which stayed internal. Small questions, polite questions, the kind of questions a curious person asks when they have too much time. The junior clerk answered them all. People answer small questions. On the 6th day, she met Councillor Ohen. He was old. His people, the Oru, were crystalline at the edges. Their skin had a faint mineral sheen that deepened with age, and Ohen was deep indeed. He walked slowly, with a staff, and he had been watching her from across the archive wing for 2 days before he crossed the floor and sat in the chair beside her. "You have been here a long time," he said. "Yes," she said. "For a sealed file." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have been on this council for 30 years. In that time, I have seen many people come here for sealed files. Most of them want money or vindication or someone to blame." He looked at her. "You are looking for something else." "I want to know what happened," she said. "That is all." He nodded, as if that answer satisfied something he had been wondering about. "The file itself I cannot give you," he said, "but there is a person, a lieutenant, currently stationed at Vale Station Myra. She was on the last vessel to receive a transmission from the Concordance before it went dark." He paused. "She filed an internal report at the time. It was buried." Sable looked at him steadily. "Why are you telling me this?" The old councillor considered. "Because I have been watching you sit in that chair for 6 days with a patience I have rarely seen. And because whatever you are looking for, I think it deserves to be found." He gave her the name, Lieutenant Sira Novak. Sable thanked him. She returned the water cup to the dispenser. She nodded once to the junior clerk. Then she walked out of Arson Hub and found the next freight route heading toward the outer Vale. The petition was still pending. She did not wait for it. Vale Station Myra was the kind of place that appeared on star charts as a dot with no name attached, the kind of dot cartographers include only because leaving it out would be less accurate. It orbited nothing of importance. It existed because someone, years ago, had decided the outer Vale needed a garrison, and this was the cheapest location to put one. The human station there had done what humans always did with places that were cold and forgotten. They had put up lights, string lights, tube lights, a hand-painted mural along the main corridor that depicted a sunrise over a planet none of them had come from. Someone had planted herbs in a row of containers near the mess hall window. They grew crooked from the recycled light, but they grew. Sable arrived on a supply-run vessel and walked off with the cargo manifest tucked under one wing as if she belonged there. She asked a young soldier near the dock where she could find Lieutenant Novak. The soldier pointed without hesitation. People in small stations always knew where everyone was. Novak was in the maintenance bay, her back to the door, running a diagnostic on a comm relay. She was tall, lean, with close-cropped hair and grease on her left forearm. She did not turn around when Sable entered. "Supply manifest goes to the quartermaster," she said. "I am not here about the manifest," Sable said. Novak turned. She looked at Sable for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, very quick, and then went still. "Can I help you?" "I think so," Sable said. "I am here about Aldous Row." The name landed in the room like a dropped tool. Novak set down the diagnostic scanner. She did not speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was careful, the voice of someone choosing each word like they were picking their way across uncertain ground. "I don't know what you've heard," she said. "Very little," Sable said. That is why I am here. She told Novak who she was. Not what she was, not in terms of species or size, but who. That she had known Ro for 2 years on Seeley's IV, that he had eaten at her table and borrowed her dictionaries, and once spent an entire afternoon fixing a hinge on her door that had been broken for 6 months, because he could not walk past a broken thing without trying to fix it. That he had left a blanket. That he had not come back. Novak sat down on a crate. She was quiet for a long time. Sable sat on the floor across from her and waited. I filed a report, Novak said finally. Right after it happened, I flagged it through 3 channels. She paused. It went nowhere. I was told the matter was classified and that further communication on the subject would be considered a breach of operational security. What was in the report? Sable asked. Novak looked at the floor. The string lights above them hummed faintly. The concordance was not lost, she said. Not the way they wrote it up. It was not a navigation failure. She stopped, breathed, started again. Admiral Bren needed to hold the approach corridor into the Vale for a fleet repositioning. The operation needed 14 hours. He did not have a vessel available for static hold without pulling from the main formation. She looked up. He pulled the concordance instead. 1 ship holding a corridor against 3 times the opposing pressure. He knew what the odds were. The concordance crew knew what the odds were. They held for 11 hours. Sable said nothing. They sent transmissions, Novak continued. We received them here. That is why I was in the report. I was the signals officer on duty. I heard them. She pressed her hands together. They were not panicking. That is what I remember. They were angry and they were scared and they kept working right to the end and they were not panicking. Rose sent a personal data packet in the last hour. I don't know who it was addressed to. I logged it as received. The packet was in the files that were sealed. She looked at Sable then, really looked at her. That was you, she said. The packet was to you. A fragment reached me, Sable said. 4 years late, I do not know how. Novak was quiet. The mural of the sunrise was visible through the open bay door, its colors warm and a little uneven, painted by someone who was better at caring than at painting. I am sorry, Novak said. It came out rough, like something she had been holding at the back of her throat for a long time. You were silenced, Sable said. It was not an absolution. It was simply what was true. I should have kept pushing. Perhaps, Sable said, but I am pushing now. She looked at the lieutenant steadily. Was there any chance of survival? Any at all? Novak met her eyes. There was a grief in her face that was old and settled, the kind that does not go away, only gets quieter. The ship took critical damage in the final hour, she said, but we never had confirmation of total loss. The official designation was assumed loss based on signal silence and operational inference. She said the last words like she was reading from a document she hated. No search was conducted. The corridor was opened for the fleet, the repositioning was completed, and the concordance was listed as lost, and the file was closed. No one went to look, Sable said. No one went to look, Novak confirmed. Sable stood. She was small against the bay door and the dim station light, turquoise scales picking up the warm colors of the painted sunrise. She looked very calm. She was not calm, but she had decided some time ago that calm was the most useful thing to look like when everything inside her was moving very fast. I am going to the wreck, she said. Novak stood up sharply. You can't go into the Vale alone, it's... I am not alone, Sable said. I have a freight captain who owes me for not reporting a minor cargo irregularity I noticed on the trip here. She tilted her head. Humans are not the only ones who negotiate. She left Vale Station Myra on the next outbound vessel. Behind her, Novak stood in the maintenance bay for a long time, looking at nothing. Then she went to her quarters and began writing a second report. She did not know yet what she would do with it, but she was done being silent. The freight hauler was called the Dull Persistence, which its captain Borvath had named himself. He said it was the most honest name he could think of. He was large, low to the ground, covered in the short, dense fur of his people, the Kessi, who came from a world where gravity was something to be taken seriously. He spoke in short sentences and disliked unnecessary conversation, which suited Sable fine. He had taken her aboard at Vale Station Myra after she had, very quietly, mentioned the 12 cases of undeclared cargo in his hold that she had noticed during the transit from the last waypoint. She had not threatened him. She had simply said that she needed passage toward the Concordance wreck coordinates and that she was good at not noticing things when there was no reason to notice them. Borvath had looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You're smaller than I expected for someone making that kind of ask." She had said, "Most things that matter are smaller than people expect." He had let her aboard. The outer veil was not what most people pictured when they thought of deep space. It was not empty. It was dense with old light, ancient debris fields, dust clouds that caught the distant stars and scattered them into something that looked almost beautiful if you were not thinking about why the debris was there. Things had ended here. The veil was full of the remains of endings. On the second day out from Myra, a council patrol vessel dropped out of transit and ran a signal alongside them. The commander on the screen was young, bureaucratically precise, and had clearly been given a script. The outer veil approach corridor was restricted. The dull persistence was ordered to state its business and prepare for redirection. Borvath reached for the controls to acknowledge and comply. Sable stepped in front of the screen. She had spent 7 days on freight vessels doing nothing but reading. She had not been reading for entertainment. She had been reading the Galactic Compact, the Sealy's Colonial Accords, the Council's own operational directives, and the 16 annexes of the Outer Veil Territorial Agreement, which was a document so tedious that it had likely never been fully read by anyone except Sable and the people who had written it. She spoke to the patrol commander for 4 minutes. She cited Article 9 of the Sealy's Compact, which guaranteed registered sapient residents of colonial worlds the right to access unclassified sites for the purposes of retrieving personal property. She noted that the Concordance wreck had not been designated a military exclusion zone, because designating it would require officially acknowledging the operational classification of its final mission, which the Council had not done, because doing so would require acknowledging the sealed file, which would require acknowledging the contents of the sealed file. The wreck was, officially, a navigation lost site. Navigation lost sites were not restricted. She finished, she waited, the patrol commander stared at her. "You are a registered sapient resident of Sealy's IV, he said, as if confirming this to himself. "Yes," she said. "And you believe you have personal property aboard the wreck?" "I believe a crew member of the Concordance was in the process of preparing personal items to deliver to me at the time of the vessel's loss," she said. "That constitutes a reasonable basis for access under the compact." There was a long silence. The commander muted his side of the communication. Sable assumed he was consulting with someone more senior. She waited. She was very good at waiting. The patrol vessel said that they would note the transit and moved off. Borvath stared at her from his seat. He had not spoken during any of this. He was quiet for another moment after the patrol moved away. "Where did you learn all that?" he said. "Ro used to read to me," she said. She turned back toward the view screen. "He said I should understand how things worked so I would never be helpless in them." She was quiet a moment. He read everything. Policy documents, old treaties, galactic trade law. He said knowing the rules was the best way to know when someone was breaking them. Borvath made a sound that might have been respect, or might have been discomfort, or might have been both. The stars of the veil moved past the window, old and close together, exactly as Ro had described them in the unfinished letter. She had read that letter so many times she could hear his voice saying the words. He had called the light older, and she had not understood what he meant until she saw it herself. The light here had traveled longer to reach you. It had a heaviness to it that newer light did not. She pressed one small claw to the cold glass of the viewport. She did not speak, but she was having the conversation in her head, the way she had been having it for 4 years, telling him things, updating him on the colony, on the weather, on the progress of the garden she had started in the back of her house. Telling him she was angry with him for not coming back, and then feeling guilty for the anger because it was not his fault, and then feeling angry again because grief did not care about fault. She told him she had found the patrol commander's face very satisfying to watch when she cited Article 9. She thought he would have laughed at that. On the sensor board, a shape appeared, faint, angular, drifting. Borvath read the return and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's it." Sable looked at the screen. The wreck of the Concordance was not small. It had been a full-size peacekeeping vessel, and most of it was still intact, drifting in a slow rotation, one section dark and crumpled where something had hit it hard, the rest still holding shape. It looked, at this distance, like something sleeping. Something was still running on it. A faint energy signature buried in the hull, not an emergency beacon, those had power limits and went dark after 2 years. Something else. Something that had been running quietly in the dark for 4 years. "I need to go aboard," she said. Borvath did not argue. She had already done the most difficult thing. Getting on the ship was just a door. The airlock opened on the 3rd try. Sable had expected worse. The Concordance was cold in the way that things get cold when warmth has been gone for a very long time, not the sharp cold of a sudden loss, but the settled, deep cold of a place that had simply given up on heat. Her breath fogged. Her claws found purchase on the grated floor, which was buckled in places but solid. She moved slowly, not from fear, but because the ship deserved that. She was small enough to pass through sections that had partially collapsed. A rescue team would have needed cutting equipment and hours. She turned sideways, folded her wings tight, and walked through a gap that reached her shoulder. She had never thought of her size as an advantage. Today it felt like one. The crew quarters were on deck 2. She did not go there first. She went to the core, the ship's central processing unit, which was where the faint energy signature was coming from. It was deep in the ship, through a corridor where the ceiling had come down on one side and the emergency lighting had long since died. She navigated by the faint luminescence of her own scales. Turquoise and silver, they put out just enough light in the dark to see a meter ahead. She had never been grateful for that particular trait before. The core was intact. It was running on the last of its reserve cells, which would have failed in another 6 months. Someone had isolated it from the main power grid before the ship lost primary systems, which meant someone had done it deliberately, under pressure, in the last hours of the Concordance's working life. They had kept one system alive. The core held everything: logs, personal files, communications sent and received, the entire record of everything the ship had been and done. Sable sat down in the core room, in the cold and the dark, and she began to look through it. The crew logs came first. She watched them in sequence because that felt right. 41 crew members. She did not know most of their names before she started. She knew them all by the time she finished. They had recorded logs right up to the final hours, some short, some long, some rambling, some very quiet. They were angry, most of them. They knew what had been done. They were not confused about it. They had been placed in an impossible position to serve a strategy they were not told about, and they had known it, and they had stayed at their posts anyway, because that was what you did, and they had been furious about it the whole time. They made jokes. She had not expected that, and then she had expected nothing else, because of course they did. Of course they did. One engineer had recorded himself telling what seemed to be an extremely long and complicated joke about a cargo inspector, which was still not finished when his final log cut off. She sat with that for a moment. Then she found Rose. His final log was not frantic. He was tired in the way that people get tired when they have been working very hard for a very long time and they can see the end of things. He was sitting at his station when he recorded it. His hair was a mess, as it always was when he had been awake for too long. He was wearing the jacket he had owned since before Seeley's IV, dark blue, collar turned up. He looked directly at the recorder. "This is for Sable," he said. Not his name, not his rank, just that. "She will find this. I do not know how or when, but she will, because she is the most stubborn creature I have ever had the privilege of knowing, and I mean that entirely as a compliment." He smiled briefly. "I am sorry I will not make it back," he said. "I had a list of things I wanted to show you. The transit markets on Vale Point. The way the gas giants here look at close range. I wanted you to see the crew. They are good people. I wanted to introduce you." He stopped for a moment. I kept meaning to write, and I kept finding myself writing to you instead of the reports, which is probably not how I should have been spending my time, but there it is. He talked for a while, about the colony, about her garden. He reminded her to not let the salt vine get too high before winter, because it would collapse under the weight. He reminded her that the southern water pump needed its filter changed every 3 months, and she always forgot the 3rd month. At the end, he said, "Don't keep the chair empty forever, Sable, I mean it. Let someone else sit in it eventually. You have enough room at that table for more than one person, and you have enough room in you for more than one friendship, even if you would argue with me about that." A pause. "You would probably win the argument. You usually did." He reached forward and stopped the recording. Sable sat in the core room of a dead ship in the dark for a long time. She was not crying. Dragons did not cry the way softer creatures did. But there was something happening in her chest that had no name in any of the 17 languages she understood. Something between grief and gratitude and the particular specific pain of being known by someone who was gone. She stayed until she was ready, then she moved. He had mentioned the collection, items he was preparing to bring back. She found them in the sealed emergency capsule in the cargo bay, sealed and latched and perfectly preserved. She opened it with the manual release and looked inside. Letters, dozens of them, drawings of the colony, of her, of the table with the 4 chairs, maps he had made of Seeley's IV's trails, notes, observations, small pressed plants from the valley, a recording of the colony's midsummer festival that someone had sent him, photographs of her, sleeping in the sun, reading, standing at the water's edge with her wings half open. He had been building a record, not because he knew he was going to die, because it mattered to him, because she mattered to him, and the colony mattered, and the small ordinary life they had shared for 2 years mattered, and he was the kind of person who documented things that mattered. She carried the capsule out of the concordance and into the light. Borvath was waiting at the airlock with a look on his face that asked no questions. She climbed aboard the hauler, sat down, and held the capsule in both front claws. The concordance grew smaller behind them as they moved away. She did not look back at it. She looked at the capsule. "All right," she said quietly, "let's go home." She did not go home first. She went back to Arson Hub. It took 11 days. She spent them going through the capsule, reading every letter, listening to every recording, not to prepare herself. She did not need to prepare herself. She was already the most ready she had ever been for anything. She went through them because he had made them for her, and she was not going to let them sit in a case, unread a moment longer than they had to. When the hub came into view on the transit screen, she set the capsule carefully in her bag, closed it, and went to find Counselor Owen. He was not surprised to see her. He looked at her, looked at the bag, and said, "You found something." "I found everything," she said. The full council session was not scheduled. Owen called it anyway. He had that authority, rarely used, reserved for matters he judged to be of significant record. He told the council's secretary it was a matter of historical testimony. The secretary told him the next available slot was 3 weeks out. He told the secretary to clear the afternoon. Sable stood before the full council of the Galactic Assembly in a chamber built for beings twice her height, with curved seats arrayed in a half circle and lighting designed to make the person in the center feel very small. She had been in smaller rooms that felt larger. She was not intimidated. She was focused, which was a different thing entirely. She played the logs, all of them. She had the core's output transferred to the chamber's system, and she played them in sequence. The crew, the final hours, Rose's last recording. She did not comment while they played. She did not need to. The crew spoke for themselves. 41 people who had known exactly what was being done to them and had stayed at their posts anyway, in voices that were tired and angry and near the end, quietly dignified. The chamber was silent when the logs ended. Admiral Bren was present. She had made sure of it. He sat in the observer's gallery, and he did not look away during the playback, which she noted and held some respect for. It would have been easy to look away. When the logs finished, Sable spoke. She gave the facts, only the facts. She cited Novik's report, the sealed file designation, the absence of a search, the energy signature that had been running in the Concordance's core for 4 years undetected because no one had gone to look. She described the capsule, what it contained, why it existed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Administrator Dura attempted, at one point, to move that the presented materials be reclassified pending review. Ohin seconded a countermotion before Dura had finished speaking. The countermotion passed. The logs and the capsule contents entered the permanent public record. After the session, Sable stood in the corridor outside the chamber. Bren found her there. He was older than she had expected, with a face that carried the particular look of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. He did not make excuses. She was prepared to sit through excuses, had steeled herself for it, but he did not make them. He said that he had made a calculation. He said the calculation had been wrong. He said that wrong was too small a word for it, but he did not have a larger one that was honest, so he used the one he had. She looked at him for a long time. "They deserve to be found," she said. He nodded. He had nothing to say to that, and he was wise enough not to try. She walked away. 3 days later, on Vale Station, Myra, Sira Novik received a message. The silence order attached to her original report had been formally rescinded. The report was now part of the same public record. Novik read the message twice. Then she sat down at her desk, put her face in her hands, and stayed there for a while. The junior soldier who looked in on her asked if she was all right. She said yes. She meant it almost. Sable went home. Seely's IV looked the same, which was what she had been hopping for. The iron and green smell of the rain, the valley in the late afternoon light. The colony had grown a little more in her absence. She counted 3 new buildings on the ridge path. A child she did not recognize waved at her from a doorway. She waved back. The colony archive received the capsule 2 days after she returned. The archivists went through it quietly and carefully, the way people handle things they understand to be important. A young one, barely grown, paused over one of the photographs, the one of Sable at the water's edge, wings half open, apparently not noticing she was being photographed. "Who took this?" the young archivist asked. "He did," Sable said. "Who was he?" She told them everything. It took a while. And she did not leave out the parts that were hard, because he had not been a perfect person, he had been a real one, and real ones deserve to be remembered fully. She told them about the books, and the ration bars and the broken hinge. About the letter he had been writing when the ship went dark, and the recordings he had made in the last hours, and the capsule he had packed not because he expected to die, but because he thought the things they had shared were worth preserving. She told them he had been right. That evening she sat alone at her table. The 4 chairs, 3 used, one with a folded blanket, faded blue. She looked at it for a long time. Then she got up, took the blanket from the chair, and folded it again, carefully, along its original creases. She set it on the seat, neat and deliberate, not put away, not removed, just settled the way you settle something that belongs somewhere. She sat back down. She opened the first letter from the capsule, his handwriting. She knew every loop and slant of it. She read it slowly. She read the next. Outside, the long season rain moved in from the east. The chair was still there. It would always be there, but she was not waiting anymore. She was remembering. There is a difference. He would have wanted her to know the difference. He had been very particular about things like that. The light was warm in the room. The rain came down outside. She read, and the evening moved around her, and somewhere in the colony a child called out, and someone laughed, and the world went on in its ordinary and extraordinary way, as it always had, as it always would. The chair stayed empty. The room was full.